Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. A gentleman in politics that I have followed a little bit and respect quite a bit got a new job last week, and I really wanted to check in with him and find out what happened and what's he doing and why is he doing it, because it's also a very interesting organization that he has joined that I think could potentially have some really positive impact on Canada, and I want to hear what he thinks and why he took the job. Scott Sims is our guest tonight. He is currently the president and CEO of the Pearson Center for Progressive Policy. The Pearson Center for Progressive Policy. Scott was a member of parliament for 17 years, from 2004 to 2021. And before that, believe it or not, he was a TV weatherman right here in Mississauga at the Weather Network in Mississauga. Scott, sir, welcome to the show.
Brian, sir, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Big fan of the show.
Thanks so much for joining us. So tell me, why did you take this job after 17 years in Parliament to being head of the Pearson Center for Progressive Policy?
Well, for several reasons. It wasn't my plan. I mean, I got first elected. I was first elected in 2004. Then, of course, I went on to 2021. So I took a year off, decided to, politics is not really, I don't call it a job. I call it, it's a life. You just commit yourself to a life. And especially when you represent central Newfoundland and from Ottawa, and you spend 10 to 20 hours a week in airports and airplanes. That's when the house was open. So I see all these stories about, the woes about airlines and delays and so on and so forth. And
You experienced them.
I've experienced it firsthand. Yeah. So it's really something. I was in an airport a short time ago and looking around going, my God, this is one thing I do not miss. But yeah, so I got a call from someone saying they thought I'd be good for this position. I've been involved with the center before as a guest on certain policy matters, mostly to do with media, because I was chair of the Heritage Committee, looking at mostly broadcasting stuff. And I decided to go for it, and I went through it, and I was lucky enough to get hired, and now we're going through our second 10-year strategy. We've been on the go for 10 years. It was started by a gentleman by the name of Andrew Cardozo, who just recently was appointed to the Senate, which he affectionately describes as a think tank with voting privileges, which is true. And he left behind a great legacy, some great conversations that we've had through the Pearson Center. A lot of it is webinar, of course, and that obviously that stems from the pandemic that we went through. We couldn't do live stuff anymore for a while, so we did webinars, quite popular, and I was involved in a few, and I'm interested in doing this for the simple reason of the content.
So tell us, take a step back and tell us, what is the Pearson Center for Progressive Policy?
Right. So it's what people commonly call a think tank. So basically, we come up with certain issues of the day. We take a deep dive into some of these issues, and we try to discover certain opinions that are around this, try to get the facts out there, see whose opinions are, get experts in the field who've been dealing with this stuff for so long, and you try to flesh out from them, their opinions, and you form your own opinion. I really like the Pearson Center for several reasons. One is because it's ideologically centered, of course, and I don't mean that just to be, it's not a big L liberal operation, by the way. Some people think it might be. It's named after a liberal prime minister. I know that. But one of the things I liked about the Pearson Center was we wanted to get to the nub of the issue, and all the things that we've talked about and the center has talked about over the years deals with things, broad issues like diversity, specific issues like the Flag Day. We also talk about some of the on-the-go issues, such as in communications. I was a guest with the Pearson Center when we talked about, Bill C-11, which is very popular right now when it comes to streaming services and so on. But you do have other think tanks, and I'm not here to besmirch them because I enjoy what they do. There's a Broadband Institute, Manning Center, which is now called something else. But we have several out there. And again, what I like about the Pearson Center is that they got to the issue with the facts. We try not to taint it in any which way, shape, or form. We just say, here are the experts on the issue. Here are some people with strong opinions. Here are some people with not strong opinions. But nevertheless, we want you, the listener, the viewer on our webinars, to come up with your own opinion. But hopefully we can make your journey to that opinion a much easier route.
You describe yourself as centrist with, not yourself, the organization is centrist, but with progressive in its name. Am I to assume that it's more left leaning?
Yeah, it's one of the things that people ask me when I first got the job, and it's like, no, not necessarily. Along the ideological scale, there's no doubt that a lot of people involved in the Pearson Center would be center left, we consider, and has been for quite some time. I consider myself slightly to the left, but I've been accused of being to the right, so it depends. So that, I guess, I'm the perfect centrist if that's the case. I've been accused of being on both sides, but I hope not. I don't want to be seen as a particular ideological point along the scale where our center lies. I think it's centered in a way, two spellings of center, where you get to, again, the issue itself. We can present people on the left, we can present people on the right, but in speaking to the board and how we want to map out the next 10 years, we just want to be that repository, that place where people can go, where they know they're not going to get one side of the issue. They know they're going to get pretty frank conversation, and I love frank conversations. So, and sometimes you probably get more left than right. Sure, that happens, but nevertheless, you are going to get a lively discussion.
The practice in the United States is to have a lot of these think tanks that are politicians that or ex-politicians that go to a think tank for a while and then come back and become a cabinet minister in a subsequent administration. Is this a revolving door, or I've noticed that a lot of the think tanks in Ottawa tend to be more academics than they are necessarily ex-politicians or future politicians?
Yeah, that's a good point. But in saying that, I mean, I think you find yourself, there's a good balance in there when you get academics and former politicians, because now you've got people who have been in the arena and those who are experts who study the arena very closely. I have a lot of academic friends that I love wholeheartedly. I love their work because I think it brings to us a data set. It brings to us an opinion in some cases, but mostly about an honest analysis about what is happening today. And I did mention earlier about communications. For instance, the government now has a bill which will soon be not far from receiving royal assent, where they want to put regulations around streaming services like Netflix and Disney and so on and so forth. It's a fascinating conversation because now it calls into play like Canadian content. For instance, what's the future? Like, we have legislation now that we want to support Canadian content through government money. What does that look like in the future in this digital world? Because now these streamers have basically turned this world upside down. And I don't want to get too much in the issue, but this is where you get the right people in. You get people in to talk about, this is where we've been, this is what we're faced with today, and in tomorrow, this is what could happen. So we lead, I guess, if you want to call that progressive, I guess that's the progression of any particular issue that I'd like to get into. And I think having a mix of all kinds of people as witnesses, or certainly as people on webinars to get their opinions. And like I say, it could be anyone who has a strong opinion.
If people want to check out the Pearson Center for Progressive Policy, is there a website you should direct them to?
Yeah, the pearsoncenter.ca. You can get a flavor of what we do. Like I said, we're now into a strategic phase where we're going to map out the next 10 years long term. So I'm looking for your feedback. So scott.sims@thepearsoncenter.ca. Let me have it.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Scott. And I'm going to ask him a little bit about his political life. We're talking about his current life right now, but maybe we'll take a step back and ask him about the last 17 years and what's changed in politics. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Scott Sims. He's currently the president and CEO of the Pearson Center for Progressive Policy. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but I want to talk a little bit about his political background, if we could, for a while. For 17 years, Scott served as the member of parliament for Newfoundland and Labrador, where he advocated for his constituents in the House of Commons. He represented Bonavista, Gander, Grand Falls, Windsor from 2004 to 2015, and Coast of Bay, Central Notre Dame from 2015 to 2021. Throughout his political career, Scott also chaired several parliamentary committees, including the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage and the Standing Committee on Fishing, Fisheries and Oceans. Early in his career, Scott worked in Mississauga, right in our city, at the Weather Network as a weather presenter and broadcasting across Canada all these storms that come and snow and things like that. He attended Mount Allison University for his Bachelor of Commerce degree and Loyalist College of Applied Arts and Science for his broadcast journalism diploma. Scott, again, welcome to the show. Thank you so much. So
Thank
17
you. And
years.
I missed the old days of working across the street from Square One Mall.
I can imagine. But the Weather Network is all the way over in
they moved to Oakville, yeah.
The Oakville, Mississauga border now.
That's right.
Scott, tell me, if you could, 17 years, long time to be in Parliament. And you've served under both Conservative and I guess Liberal prime ministers, both minority governments as well as majority governments. You know, one of the people in politics that I respected a lot in the last couple of years, Marc Garneau, resigned just a week ago, and he was pretty sanguine, I think, about partisanship. You know, the very partisan political nature of Parliament. What's Parliament like? Has it gotten worse? Has it gotten the same? What do you think?
I think the worst part is, I mean, the temperature in the room is extremely high right now. It was very high when I first got to Parliament in 2004. But bear in mind, that was 13 years of Liberal government. Paul Martin was Prime Minister. The Conservatives had just created a new party. So they were quite eager to get into government. We were quite eager to see that they not. It was very heated at that point. It settled a bit shortly afterwards. But the problem with settling was we were in a minority position for all those years. So there was a lot of tongue wagging and finger wagging all through the Parliament. But to be honest with you, that was a partisan nature of the House. Now it's gone beyond partisan. It's polarized now. What I fear the most, and this is the part of politics, if I can be sanguine as well, because I know Mark has been, and I could even go even further by saying that the problem with a lot of the politics now is that what you have is there are personality attacks that take place where you have to absolutely ridicule your opponent to the point where nothing that they say has anything to do with logic or anything to do with might be a good idea. And that's what bothers me the most, because now and quite frankly, when you go after someone's character like that in politics, that's intellectually lazy, because you don't even have to do your homework once you get into that realm, because all you need to do is call that person corrupt or, not fit for a lot of things, as we say back home. And the problem becomes that there is no conversation, and without that conversation, there becomes no middle ground. So it becomes a game of all or not. It's a binary code system now where it's either them or them, and there's no middle ground. Currently, yes, we do have what they call a supply agreement with NDP and Liberals. But Brian, I can remember when the Conservatives were a minority, and I mean, they never got along with anybody. Now, I don't say that in a bad way, because if you look at it, if you look at the ideological scale of the House of Commons, there's really right, left. There's only one party really on the right. That's the Conservatives. Then you've got a host of others. The Bloc can be considered left, NDP, Liberal. So, center, left, and left there's a mix of parties there. So the idea of getting along, supply agreements, coalitions, if you want to go that far, yes, that's possible. But when you're a conservative minority, nobody's your friend. So you pretty much have to rule by stealth. Now, a lot of people gave Stephen Harper a hard time for that, but I see it for what it was. It's that I don't think he had much of a choice, but there were a lot of negative things that took place around that time. So let me go back to your original question. Has it gotten worse? Yes, it has. I think what are some of the root causes? I'll tell you one right off the bat, and that's Facebook, and that's social media. Local media, and I'm being on the station that you're on, I'm sure you can understand, local media, it's tough. It's not easy to be in this market. And as a result, a lot of the news, like you mentioned my ridings, basically it's central Newfoundland, central part of the island. The local media really has been decimated. There isn't much there anymore.
So by being partisan, they get some press?
Sorry?
By being partisan, they get some press? Is that what you're saying?
You can get some press, but there's nobody there to actually cover it. It's like a tree falls in the forest, no one's around, then did it actually make a noise? So the problem was we had a local newspaper that is now defunct and went electronic. That's gone. The local CBC is now not just Central Newfoundland, but it's much bigger. I'm not blaming these organizations. I mean, at the end of the day, there has to be some sort of monetization of it. But the problem becomes is that you don't get locally informed on the local issues, but people still want their local news. So where do they get it? Well, obviously they get it through their Facebook or through anything else. A lot of Facebook that I get is fine. I read it. It's great, but a lot of people get unfiltered stuff. I like journalism. I have a great respect for journalism. I want to read journalism. But sometimes, you get these stories and it's not practiced using the fundamentals of journalism, which is fair and balanced. And therefore, you get some outlandish theories out there. And now, following the outlandish theories that were presented that evolved out of more or less out of algorithms and eyeballs and the lack of local news, as it evolved, more people took advantage of it. You just got to look south of the border. I won't say his name, but his initials are Donald Trump, right? I mean, if you think about it, what is going on here is that, there are people who use this stuff and they can get away with it by not being, before it was like sometimes you want to get away from an issue, you pivot from an issue by saying something or getting onto a different subject. So this is how, when you're in the world of politics, you have to pivot off because you don't want to talk about it, or you don't have the right facts for it and that sort of thing. But now some politicians just say it as it not, and they know the difference. But guess what? They know what audience they're speaking to. So it's not the local paper anymore. It's Facebook Live.
So is this a made in Canada problem, or is this just the populist problem that the whole world, or at least the whole Western world has, that is a copy of Donald Trump and his antics?
It's the whole world. It's a digital world problem. And unfortunately, most of the algorithms are driven by the fact that they can monetize this. So they get more eyeballs means more money. And, journalistic principles can take a back seat in many occasions. And a lot of people read when I campaigned in 2021, I'll give you an example. Last election, I was physically threatened twice, violence. I've never experienced it before in my political life in 20 years of politics. I didn't even say anything. I just showed up in this one man's driveway and out he came from his door and physically threatened to pick me up and he was a big man and I'm not that big. So he physically threatened to pick me up and throw me off his property, like not asking me to leave or listening to my spiel. He knew who I was. It was all about, he just spewed every theory that he had just read on social media, which had no bearing of truth whatsoever. So the problem is that some people read some outlandish stories, but they want to believe it so badly that it's true. It registers as true. And this is a dangerous, dangerous situation, because now if you look at somewhere like the Pearson Center, where we find common ground on issues, in the political forum, the political common ground it just doesn't exist.
So there was this big study done in Stanford, you may be aware of it, that they took people from blue states and red states, Republicans and Democrats, and put them in a room and asked them to discuss an issue. And they often would come to a common solution. But the interesting thing was, if they put them in the room and didn't tell people what their previous political situation was, then they would come to a common point of view. But if they put them in the room and told everyone that they were either Republican or Democrat, they wouldn't come to a common point of view. And so the precondition was, if they were not identified politically, they could talk. But if they were identified politically, they could talk, but they didn't listen and they didn't come to a common point of view.
I never heard the story, but that's very interesting. Well, in case, there you go. There's a fine example of why you come in with labels and preconceived notions about people that you're having a conversation with. You look at people like the truckers convoy that was here in Ottawa. There were people just yelling at the streets and not because they were wearing a sign, only because they looked the part of someone they disagreed with, and therefore they became, rude to them or that sort of thing, and vice versa. It went back and forth. So it's unfortunate, because now that's when people say to me, have we become too partisan?
But then the judge in the inquiry, I think, actually criticized the prime minister and said that he threw oxygen on the fire, or fuel on the fire, by not talking and listening to them. What do you think?
I'm glad you brought that up, because when I remember when I was the MP for the entire time of Stephen Harper's prime ministership, and now most of Justin Trudeau's. When you take a section, it's so tempting to take a section of the population and turn them into a whipping post, for lack of a better term, for rhetoric, so that you can get people to come on board with you because you have a common enemy, right? It's easy, but it's lazy, and it's dangerous. We heard Stephen Harper go through labor leaders. He ravaged them. Toronto elites were picked on. And now, if you see with people that are being called in a particular group racists, yeah, we know some of them are racist, blah, blah, blah. We have to stop identifying certain segments of the population, because when the person does that and you say, well, you can't really call these people racist, you don't really know, you don't even know who they are. And you can say, and if they return with, well, we know some of them are, well, no, you don't. And you just cast a broad brush across a whole bunch of people. This goes back to when Hillary Clinton talked about the basket of deplorables, right? That was a mistake. You shouldn't do that. If somebody is a racist, you will find out when you talk to them, not when you see a bunch of people, or you just assume that there is a certain section of the population.
While it was a minority of people that supported the trucker convoy, it was 15% of Canada's population, which is 3.5, 4 million people. It's a lot of people that actually, based on polls, supported the trucker convoy, and then I think more people that maybe not supported the convoy or the occupation, whatever you want to call it, actually supported the opposition to mask mandates and vaccine passports and things like that. What could have we done differently? What should have we done differently
in the course of the debate? Well, one of the things you can do is, well, obviously it's a factually based thing. If someone says that, masks did nothing for the pandemic, that's simply not true. And there are enough stats out there to say that, to talk about recoveries, people in the hospital, people who were hospitalized, survived, had vaccines, as opposed to people who did not have the vaccine. All this stuff is out there, and it exists. And I think the responsibility is on us to search that out. And as politicians are concerned, their responsibility is to put out good, sound policy that helps protect the public, and not to say you're wrong because, and to identify people in a way that you should not do that. I remember, Brian, when I first started in 2004, and the big issue was same-sex marriage. People who were against same-sex marriage said the nastiest things in writing and phone calls. The vast majority of them now, I don't have hard numbers, but I suspect the vast majority of them have a different opinion over time, because the issue happened. Many opinions have evolved, God love them. And now we're in a different position where the vast majority of people in this country, I assume, would support same-sex marriage. But you see what happened there was that we went after the issue, but we didn't attack the people involved. Now we just go after, if you say something that you say, well, I don't know, like, to me, vaccines work. If you just simply say that, people say you're woke, you're sucked into some government message, you're weak, you're all these nasty things that come out of this new world of politics, where there's no way you can get a common ground. Consider those people that were at the convoy.
What's the solution?
Do you think that any of them will eventually say, oh, yeah, maybe vaccines are a good thing? I'm not so sure. Sorry, go ahead.
So what's the solution? How do we actually get people to not only talk, but listen to each other?
Well, if you listen to the Pearson Center, this is where I plug the Pearson Center. I think that as for people who have strong opinions, I think we have to go through a large listening exercise. One of the things I did in the last 6 years of being a member of Parliament was, I went back to an old saying that an older politician, he's passed now, God love him, but he told me when I first got elected, look, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that's the ratio you should use your job with. You listen twice as much as you speak, which is hard to do for a politician, quite frankly. But in saying that, if you listen and say to someone, look, find the points you agree on. It's possible. Remember, in the study that you mentioned, people came to something in common when they didn't label each other or didn't know what camp they were in. So if you do this, and if we act like adults and listen to people and just say to them, well, no, and then you'd have a far greater conversation. At the very least, you can respectfully disagree, but respectfully disagree, because, Canada is the best nation on earth, not just because it's, has beautiful scenery, because there's beautiful people.
I'll tell you a story. In 1976, I was a young Liberal, and at the then time, Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau was under attack by a lot of young people, a lot of people across the country, a lot of Liberals. And he did something that President Bartlett, my favorite president of all time, from West Wing did, which is he just wore people out by listening to them. He called a whole bunch of people to Ottawa, and he spent all morning listening to complaint after issue after problem after issue for probably 4 hours. And I think we finally took a break at like 1 o'clock after starting at like 8 or so in the morning. And then he responded until late into the evening, and he just wore people out by listening and by responding. And Bartlett did that. He was famous for coming out for a press conference. If he had issues, he would just wear them out and make sure that people felt heard. I do think that one of the mistakes that our current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made during the last year is he didn't listen. Even when people are saying something that you disagree with completely, they still deserve to be listened to. Sure. And you should respond to them. Yeah. And you know what? I think one of the best examples of that is how in the State of the Union, President Joe Biden actually listened to and allowed the Republican crazies to make a couple of comments, and then he used it against them. And so therefore, sometimes, just listening is the right thing. And to your comment about 2 ears and 1 mouth, I had someone, when I used that quote, come up to me and say, yes, and remember, God made the mouth so it can close and shut and stay shut, and the ears are never closed and never shut. We're going to take a break and come back in just 2 minutes with Scott Sims. And we're going to talk a little bit about Newfoundland, because he complains about Canada. But Newfoundland, politics has been a blood sport forever, I would have thought. So he's got to be used to it there. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Scott Sims. He's the president and CEO, recently appointed to that position, of the Pearson Center for Progressive Policy. Before that, he was a member of Parliament for 17 years, from 04 to 21. And before that, he was a TV weatherman at the Weather Network in Mississauga. I got to ask you, we talked about polarization in politics and politicians yelling and screaming and whatnot at one another. Isn't that just the way things are done in Newfoundland and always have been?
Yes, but it was partisan. It wasn't polarized. We loved each other dearly. We argued with each other. We have fits of anger and the like, and screaming and yelling and that sort of thing. Nothing too violent. We never really had a large clash of violence in Newfoundland politics. Well, I guess around the early part of the 20th century we did, but nevertheless, it's someone that we argued with all day, and sat down and played bingo or sat in a bar and had a beer with that night and laughed about other things and found common ground. We did find common ground, but it was always colorful. We have a streak of, I was going to say the streak of the Irish, but we also have I'm descended from English. A lot of them are descended from Irish, so maybe that's a part of it. I don't know, but nevertheless, it was never to the point of violence. It was just a very loud but whimsical conversation. Quick story. One of my favorite quotes. This happened about 3 or 4 years ago, and I was in a town called Twillingate, which is in the riding that I represented. And this gentleman, he's even in his mid-80s, came up. I knew him, and I knew he was coming. I knew he was talking to me. He came up to me. He said, "Hey, yeah." He said, "You're Scott Sims." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're the MP." I said, "Yeah." And he stopped and he looked and he said, "Well," and he was dead serious. He said, "Listen, I don't care what they say. You're a good man."
Did you ever
So,
debate against John Crosby?
no, I've spoken to John Crosby. He once he did give me some strong words in an airport one time when Paul Martin was prime minister. He came up and he said, he didn't say, he just walked straight up to me and just said, "We got to do something about this issue with Newfoundland and Paul Martin." And my response was, "Well, hi, John. It's nice to meet you." I see you haven't changed a bit. So yes, I've met him, but I was not in politics when he was.
You've certainly had some interesting people in politics in
Mhm.
Newfoundland.
Yeah, well, not only in politics, but also in political satire between Rick Mercer and This Hour's 22 Minutes. So,
Yep.
yeah, we've staked our case when it comes to politics, certainly for not just its, obviously the public value of politics being our government, but also we've managed to extract the entertainment value out of every piece of politics that's out there as well.
Now, what's this thing you do with a cod?
What's that? Oh, the kissing the cod?
Yes. What's that all about?
All right, so that's called being screeched in. Screech is basically it's called Newfoundland Screech. It's a rum. It's a very sweet rum. It's kind of ironic because it's actually not from Newfoundland. It's actually Jamaican rum, but we take it and put our own spin on it. And what you do is you have to take a shot of the Newfoundland Screech. You kiss the cod, and then you get sworn in as an honorary Newfoundlander Labradorian.
Excellent. Newfoundland Labrador is having a big discussion with Quebec right now in regards to power. Yeah. What do you think of that issue?
Yeah, I think it's very important because the thing is one of the things going against us is also for us, which is our geography. We are an island, and Labrador has one borders with one province, and that is Quebec. So many years ago, we did a power agreement back in the 1970s, and basically we produced it in a place called Churchill Falls in Labrador. Quebec buys this power from Churchill Falls at a rate that was fair in the early 1970s. Problem is the rate doesn't go up, so they're still paying the same amount that they did back then. So instead of extracting, they get half the revenue, they get like 98, 99% of the those numbers are not, I'm just by way of illustration. So that deal runs out in 20 years. So we're doing other power developments, and hopefully with Quebec, I think the temperature was always in a bad place. We had Muskrat Falls, which is now a contentious issue because that's costing a lot more than we thought. The whole point was to produce the power, push it through the island and down through Nova Scotia. Like I say, that's way over budget, and it's a contentious issue. So I think the way the current government is talking with Quebec is probably the most mature way of doing this.
What are the other big issues facing Newfoundland right now? Is it offshore oil and gas?
Well, that's all. The thing, I mean, Newfoundland obviously famous for fishing, codfish in particular. Now, the cod collapsed many years ago, so the biggest, the most profitable species there now is snow crab, and a bit of lobster, snow crab, and some shrimp as well. But since then, since the late 1970s, of course, we discovered oil. And because technology has now advanced to the point where it's easy to get up off the ocean bed, because that's where it is. It's not on our land. It's, well, some on our land, but most of it's out in the water. So we get the lion's share of the benefits from that. And that was a contentious issue too, because ironically, if the oil is on land, it belongs to the province. If it's in the water of your coast, it belongs to the feds. So it's a contentious issue that's been going on for quite some time. But yeah, oil and gas is probably the biggest contributor right now, especially when gas prices are high or oil rates or oil prices are high. Mining has now come, there have been several gold mines now that are starting to open, literally gold mines at the end of the rainbow, as it were. And so these natural resources issues have been worked out in Newfoundland's favor. But of course, it's still a province that's quite a bit in debt. It's an expensive province to govern because there are a lot of roads, a lot of communities, and they're living all over the place, and that becomes an expensive venture. I mean, if you think about it, Newfoundland and Labrador has the same population as Mississauga.
Really? Whole
Same thing.
province.
Yeah, 500,000 or over 500,000, just over.
And how many MPs?
7.
7. Well, one more MP. Um, Politics. Is it a good job? A bad job? Would you recommend it to somebody?
It's good if you want it. You really have to want it. If you find yourself saying, I could do that, or I could get into that, you think you need to do a deeper think, because it's not a job, it's a life. Now, I mentioned to you earlier, I used to spend 10 to 15 hours a week in airports and airplanes when I was going back and forth. I mean, I had to go from Ottawa to Mississauga, Pearson Airport, all the way out to St. John's, and then back to Gander. So that's flying around the country just to get in the middle. And that's not counting delays, or any delays on the way. You're in trouble because there's only 2 flights a day to Gander, and that becomes very problematic. So you really got to want to be in politics, especially party politics. I mean, the thing about party politics is a whole other level of stress, because, you have a party, you have a team, and cohesion works within that team. Sometimes you get rebellious. I did on many occasions. I was kind of famous for it. But that's the job. And now, if you don't like to travel, stick with municipal politics, because that could be rewarding as well. But it is a life, even if it's municipal. It's a life. People. I'll leave you with this example. I used to go to the local grocery store. I used to pick up probably $90 worth of groceries. At the time, was more than it is now. Less than $100. It used to take me 2.5 hours to do it, because people know who you are, and you can't just look at someone and say, "I'm sorry, I'm not working right now." No, you're elected. You're always working. Don't get away from your duty. If you want a 9-to-5 job, there are many of them out there, but politics is not one of them.
I was friendly with the former mayor of Mississauga, Hazen McCallion, and she used to go to a different grocery store every week so that she could have exactly those interactions. And similarly, different churches and different breakfast nooks, because she wanted to have those interactions.
As a matter of fact, when I traveled, I had at one point 160 towns in my riding, and I always made a point of getting some groceries everywhere I went. Otherwise, because some people, they don't want to call you. They feel they're bothering you or something of that nature. And they see you in a grocery store and they talk to you about their issues, and I write them down and go back, because, you should approach you're paying the politician, you're paying them. You should be able to approach them. But some people have an issue with that until they see you in the flesh. I think politicians have to be more tangible in that sense.
I think in addition, when you say it's a life, you probably were working nonstop when you were in Ottawa, Monday to Thursday or Friday, and then you'd go back to your constituency, and you were at constituency office and dinners and breakfasts and lunches and church hall basements and whatnot, all Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then you went back to Ottawa.
Yeah, the only advantage of being in Ottawa was I could take 5 minutes to get to a meeting and another 5 minutes to the next meeting. In a place like Newfoundland, it would take an hour and a half, 2-hour drive to get to one meeting, an hour to the next meeting, that sort. So it becomes, there's a lot of travel. Yeah.
But is it a good job?
Yeah, it's good. Oh, it's great. It's fulfilling. It's for all the rhetoric they say, oh, it's a wonderful, fulfilling experience. It is that. But, you have.
Why? If you spend all this time interacting with people, meeting with people, dealing with this complaint and that issue and this complaint and that problem, and people being violent to you and stuff like that, why is it a good job?
When you're on the phone and you call someone and said, I made your case, I did the best that I could, and it got resolved. And then you don't hear, you just hear silence, and then you hear someone crying on the other end of the phone, because you just basically set them up probably for the rest of their lives, or help them out. That's a pretty powerful feeling. That is an incredibly powerful. You'll only know that feeling until you've done it. Now, likewise, it becomes also saddening when you can't help a person for whatever regulation or whatever is out there. I mean, there are rules in place. If you call a politician and say, can you pull some strings for me to do this? That doesn't work like that anymore.
I really worry that our political system today is very partisan, as we've talked about. You've got populists on the right. You've got people that think that the Liberal Party and the NDP are in a coalition, have gone to the left. You have a gaping hole in the center. I think we don't have much of a focus on the economy, on growth, on prosperity. We've got a lot of issue on culture wars and rhetoric that tries to divide us. What are you at the progressive, the Pearson Center for Progressive Policy going to do to try to address these issues?
That's a good question, because now I think something like a Pearson Center is probably needed more now than ever before, because you're going to get some rhetoric that may not be completely anchored in the truth. It's kind of a way of getting around a certain issue, but only telling you what you want to hear. I know this sounds nefarious, and it happens a lot in politics, too much. But I think the responsibility now is on us to say, yeah, I don't know if I could take that at face value. I'm going to have a look at that and get into it. So I put it this way. If someone comes to your door looking for a vote, several things you got to realize. When you talk to them, or certain things you should be wary of. Explore what they're telling you is the issue. Bring up your issue, what values to you, because sometimes they don't do that. But they should be, because remember, every riding, whether it's provincial, federal, municipal, every district has one. And you all have one person to represent you. So make sure that person, if they're not aware of your issue, make sure they're aware. And do your research. I mean, hey, everybody can Google now. It's not that hard. I mean, and the thing is now there are there's a lot of rhetoric that's just not true, but there's also a lot of tools out there that allow you to get to the truth. That's one of the incentives for me to join the Pearson Center, was to say, let's look at that issue once again. I'll give you an example. The C11 business that's going on. A lot of people are saying that it's out there to censor, to get in on your internet and read your messages. It's just totally not true. Now, there are other problems with C11. Yes, there are. And they're worth debating to see if this is the type of government legislation you agree on, and you can vote accordingly.
Scott, this, the emergency measures inquiry effectively said it was a failure of our political system. There was federal and provincial politicians that weren't talking, that there were civil servants and politicians that weren't talking, that it just seemed that there was a mess.
Yeah.
Are you positive about Canada and our political system, or negative right now?
I'm positive about it, but I'm positive that the mechanisms are there by which we can have a conversation with each other. There's no reason why that a prime minister can't call in the leader of the opposition and leaders of the other parties and say, all right, we have this situation in Ottawa. It looks like we're going to use the Emergencies Act. We could or could not. It may not be necessary. We need to explore these options. One of the things that some European countries do it better than us, because for reasons, some of them have coalition governments, which, by the way, is not a bad thing, as what a lot of people would say. The only reason why some politicians think coalitions are bad is because they know they can't be a part of one.
Right.
It's like, that party's terrible only because they didn't invite me. So what the experience over there is that some of the smaller parties get recognition which is why one of the things, if I was to suggest anything to the current government, would be, we have a dental care program now. It's a government-sponsored dental care program, and I think that the government should look to the NDP and say, you did a good thing there. There are certain policies that the Conservatives would put forward. For instance, Pierre Poilievre recently talked about accreditation for healthcare workers across the country. Bravo. I think that's fantastic. My son is a nurse. I think it's great. So there's a personal reason why we should actually push for that. But these conversations, the problem is, Brian, is that it's now becoming a winner gets all, and winner only. And these parties are striving for just that and singly just that, and not just minority parliaments. They want majority governments. Someone say, do you think this minority will work? Minority governments work when the room is filled with adults. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
That's why I'm convinced we're not going to have representation by population, popular vote ever, because everyone, when they're out of government, thinks it makes a lot of sense, because it truly does make a lot of sense. But once they've got a chance of majority government, they kind of like it, and they don't want to have to collaborate and consult and be cooperative and work with other people. Scott Sims, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Brian, the pleasure was mine. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a break and come back with a few more concluding comments from myself in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody.